Dear friends, I heard this story from an elderly woman. She was scolding her grandchildren for talking passionately about goths, visiting cemeteries, and other things in that vein. Her rebukes made no impression on the teenagers, and then she told them a story from her life. And the story began many years ago, when the woman herself was 14 years old. They decided to break down a very old house on her street, built at the beginning of the 19th century. The inhabitants of that house had moved out. The house stood empty and mournfully awaited its destructive fate. As often happens, local children do not miss the opportunity to walk around the empty house in search of something interesting. Our heroine, let's call her Dasha, also went to that house, hoping to find old books or postcards there that could be sold to someone. In one of the apartments, she found a large basket of abandoned items. Among the pile of old things she saw a box of old letters and photographs almost crumbling with time. It was this box that she took herself. The letters were of little interest to her. And among the old photographs of men in period costumes and women in hats and corsets, she noticed one, the only one. From the old photograph, a young man in a military uniform was looking at her. She liked him very much. She kept this photo, hid it in one of her books, and from time to time she looked at this amazingly beautiful and noble face of a bygone era. Time passed, Dasha turned 17, and the picture was still lying in her book, pleasing her dreams. The older Dasha grew, the more she liked and cared about the picture. It seemed to her that a living, real, kind friend, whom she had seen just yesterday, was looking at her from the picture. She was talking to him, telling him about her business, dreams and plans. It seemed to her that he was listening to her attentively, the expression of his eyes changing and he even smiling at her. This went on for quite some time, and the stranger from the old picture occupied all her thoughts. What was his name? Where did he live? What did he do? How was his fate? One night she dreamed of him. They were walking through the streets of her city. Everything around was different. The new houses were gone, and the old ones were younger, and all around her were people in old clothes, and him young, handsome. He looked at her with amorous eyes, and told her something. Dasha was no longer interested in the reality in which she existed, or her peers, or her studies. Now she was only happy in her dream, in which there was he and she. Her family couldn't understand what was really going on with her, but she won't tell anyone what was really going on with her. And the following happened. He started asking Dasha to come to his graveyard, to his grave. "How will I find you?" Dasha asked, but he described exactly how to find his grave in the city cemetery. "I'm sorry," he said, "it's hard except you, my love, no one remembers me. Not a living soul will shed a tear for me. For many years no one comes to my grave. Come, at least, you to me. Ease my suffering." That's what the man in her dream said, asking him over and over again to come to his grave. According to the descriptions she told the grown-up Dasha, his grave was in the old part of the cemetery, where no one has been buried for a long time. It was a dusky, scary place. I walked past tombstones destroyed by time, and crooked crosses. Many of the graves were overgrown with shrubs, and many had trees growing on them. Looking for his grave, I walked all alone. I did not see a single person there, only crows cawing loudly in the sky. I walked past the graves, and my feet sank into the grass and bushes. Something crunched beneath my feet, probably dry branches, and it felt like I was walking on bones. Suddenly my heart raced. I saw what I was looking for. 3 black tombstones lay on 3 graves in one row. On the outermost stone I could still see the letters, the name of the person I had come to see. The grass grew low around the graves, and only the stone rose as a gloomy mound above the seemingly lifeless plants. And then, as if someone had pulled me down, I fell onto the stone and couldn't get up. I was lying on the rock, my cheek pressed against it, and I completely lost track of time. Where was my consciousness at that time? It's hard to say. I went to him again and again. And in my dreams I heard his words. "Why is fate so cruel? Why does time separate us? If only we could be together. Come to me." And my life without him was no fun at all. More and more often I began to think, I want him, and let me be buried in his grave. Death was coming closer and closer to me, and I was ready to die, just to be with him. One evening, as I was about to leave the cemetery and was walking past 3 black stones, I suddenly heard a voice. "Honey, come here to me." I turned around and was horrified to see the figure of a woman next to the first stone. I did not know who was buried there, and I did not understand how a woman had appeared on this grave. "Honey, please come to me," the woman repeated again. Her voice was senile, as if broken. I approached her and could see her. The tall, statuesque woman wore a long black dress of an antique style. Her gray hair was covered with a thick black lace shawl. Her face, covered with deep wrinkles, was very pale. "My dear, why do you come here so often? Is this the grave of your loved one?" "Yes," I answered, "there is someone I love buried here." Why I answered her so frankly, I did not know myself. "No, darling, here lies someone who died a long time ago, too long ago." And then, on some inner impulse, I began to speak. I told the woman my whole story. And she listened and looked at me and was silent. When my story was finished, she said, "What have you decided, my dear? Do you want to die before your time? Do you want to take a sin on your soul? If you do that, your whole family's life will be ruined and you yourself will be in the throes of remorse. Forget him. Burn his picture. Live." With these last words, the woman raised her hand and touched my arm. I noticed how thin her fingers were and how cold her hand was. "I'm going," I said, and added, "How did you come here, that I did notice you? Will you be leaving now, to see you off?" "No, honey, I'll stay here for now. I need to be here. There's still time." I had a terrible dream that night. He was begging me for something, and I couldn't understand his words. Suddenly a woman came up to him. She was a tall woman, dressed in the old fashion. For some reason I thought it was his mother. She spoke in French loudly and sharply. I didn't understand the words, but it seemed to me that she was very angry with him. Soon everything fell into darkness, and I woke up. Anxiety gripped me. I was afraid of who knows what. For a whole week I could not leave the house and go to his grave. My parents were very adamant and would not let me out of the house, constantly talking about my health and condition. When I was able to leave the house, I went straight to him. As I approached his grave, I suddenly heard a voice, a vague mumbling sound I heard. As I got closer, my legs buckled in horror. The earth was scattered where he was buried, a stone lay to the side, and a deep hole gaped where he had been buried. The grave opened for me, were the thoughts that immediately came to my mind. I felt bad. But then I saw some men approaching the grave with shovels. "What are you doing?" I asked them. "What do you care?" was the reply. "It's the grave of my loved one." The men looked at each other. "What lover?" "You are mistaken. These are old graves, over 100 years old. Look for your beloved elsewhere. There are new burials planned for this site." "What are you doing?" "People lie here, relatives come here." I continue to be indignant. "Young lady, don't play with our heads. In our memory no one goes here to the graves." "Yes, really. The relatives themselves must have died long ago," the gravediggers answered, almost in unison. "That's not true. I saw a woman come in here last week." "What woman?" "The old woman in black." The men looked at each other again. "She must be the dead woman again," said one of them. "What dead woman?" I whispered. "You girls should visit the graveyard less, it is not good. You have not seen a living woman, a black ghost. She can be found only at the old graves. They say she comes out of her grave and wanders, and she's buried here." One of the men pointed to the very grave by which I saw the old woman. "What did you do with the body that was in that grave?" "Get out of here." I was getting more and more frightened. "With the body?" The men looked at each other again, whispered something to each other. "And you say your beloved was lying there? Well, this is for you." With these words, one of the men took a ring out of his pocket and handed it to me. "Here, they found it in the grave. Take it and get out of here. We have no time to talk to you, we have a lot of work to do." The ring was blackened and dirty, with a tarnished stone. I put out my hand to take the ring, and suddenly there was some movement behind the men. Where the outermost black gravestone stood, the figure of a woman appeared. I recognized her immediately. It was she who spoke to me. The woman looked at me angrily, and then the words clearly sounded in my head. "This ring is not for you. Don't you dare touch it." In the same second, her dark figure darted toward us. I cried out loudly, and the workers saw the black ghost and fled. I was so afraid that I ran home, and for years afterward I couldn't get over the horror just thinking about the cemetery. I burned his picture without regret. I became madly afraid of the man in the picture, who was looking at me and smiling. I thought a lot about this story, and I think I realized 3 identical black tombstones could belong to the same family. The woman in black looked a lot like the woman in my dream. Maybe it was his mother who had saved my life. Only one thought haunted me: why had this woman become a black ghost? And who was her son, who so appealingly led me from the road of life to the road of death? Such is the story. What is true and what is false in this story is hard to say. But one thing, I think, is clear. We do not know what is on the other side of death, and therefore such attachments to a dead person are very dangerous, especially if you do not know who that person was when he was alive.